In the heart of the Milky Way, orbiting a cold, lifeless moon, the Galactic Peace Council Hall floated in silence. It was a marvel of design, a wide circular chamber enclosed by crystal walls, allowing views of stars stretching endlessly into space. Delegates from dozens of civilizations sat around a polished obsidian table that shimmered under soft artificial light. The air inside was filtered, temperature-controlled, and still. Everything about the place spoke of control, order, and balance. Humanity had earned its seat at the table 2 centuries ago, not through war, but through diplomacy. Earth's most admired invention wasn't a weapon or a machine. It was the Courteous mode neural implant. This small device, placed behind the ear at birth, gently suppressed aggression, sarcasm, and any emotion considered disruptive to social order. Over time, humans became known as the most polite species in the galaxy. Calm in crisis, respectful in debate, and almost impossible to provoke. The implant had turned Earth into a model of peace. Commander Jack Voss, Earth's lead ambassador, sat upright in his silver-lined seat. At 38, he was already a respected figure in the galaxy's highest council. His expression was calm, his eyes steady, his voice always measured. Today he wore Earth's formal navy blue diplomatic uniform, its golden trim representing unity among nations. He carried himself like a man who had never once raised his voice, and he hadn't, not since the implant was activated at age 5. The council hall hummed gently as discussions began. A minor border dispute between the Kritari League and the Van Dominion was on the agenda. Jack listened, nodding occasionally, offering careful suggestions when asked. His words were neutral, polished and diplomatic. Other humans on his delegation mirrored his tone, speaking with smooth voices, hands folded neatly, backs straight. Across the table sat Varkan Sith, the Andronax Empire's representative. Tall, broad and covered in dark silver armor, Varkan didn't believe in implants. The Andronax valued strength, honesty and open emotion, even if it meant conflict. Varkan often mocked the human's artificial restraint. He leaned forward now, his low voice cutting through the calm. "Commander Voss," he said, with a smirk, "do your people ever speak their true thoughts? Or has the implant turned your species into smiling statues?" Jack offered a polite smile. "Peace requires discipline, Representative Varkan. We've chosen to prioritize harmony." "Harmony," Varkan echoed, "or hiding." The room fell quiet. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Jack responded without pause, his voice smooth as water. "What we choose to suppress, we also choose to understand. Emotional control is not the absence of feeling, it is the practice of wisdom." Varkan leaned back, amused but unsatisfied. He enjoyed these exchanges, though Jack never gave him the reaction he wanted. Outside the station, the distant sun flared quietly, a routine pulse of energy across the black void. Inside, the meeting resumed. Jack made a mental note about an upcoming vote on trade policies. His mind, sharp and trained, worked like a machine, compartmentalizing emotion, organizing facts, calculating every word. But beneath his flawless control, something small stirred, a flicker of unease. It wasn't new, but lately it had grown stronger. He couldn't name it exactly. It was not fear, not anger, not sadness, just a faint hum of disconnection. He ignored it, as he always did. There was no time for vague feelings. The galaxy needed clarity. The meeting continued, the stars watching in silence. The council hall, with its smooth curves and clean light, stood as a symbol of unity. The obsidian table reflected the steady glow of the central beam, casting soft halos around each delegate. For a while the room moved in harmony. Voices measured, languages translated instantly by neural links, each statement weighed with careful thought. The daily rhythm of diplomacy flowed with the same precision it had for years. Commander Jack Voss adjusted the data panel before him. A small blink in the corner showed his implant sync rate 100%. His thoughts were clear, steady. Every pulse from the Courteous mode chip reinforced calm. As the Kratari delegate presented a grievance over satellite interference, Jack prepared his response. He would suggest a neutral review board, fair, polite, predictable. Then something odd happened. A flicker, barely noticeable. The light above them dimmed for a half-second. The crystal walls trembled faintly, not enough to alarm, just enough to be strange. Jack paused. Others did too. Delegates turned their heads. Silence hovered. Then another flicker, this one stronger. The overhead beam surged and then cut out for 3 full seconds before humming back to life. On Jack's panel, the implant sync rate dropped to 74%. He blinked. That had never happened before. Across the table, Varkan Sith's sharp eyes narrowed. "Something is wrong," he muttered. Unlike the others, he wore no implant. He relied on instinct. This station's shielding is strong but not flawless. As if to answer, the entire chamber buzzed, not loudly, but with enough force to shake cups and data tablets. Then, without warning, all neural links crashed. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was total. One moment, every human was calm, composed, in full command of their emotions. The next moment, the courteous mode was gone. Jack's breath caught. His thoughts were no longer filtering through the smooth rhythm of the implant. For the first time in over 30 years, he felt everything all at once. Not just awareness, but emotion, raw and real, like a dam breaking. He felt heat rise in his chest, a pressure in his throat, and a sudden wild confusion he had no training for. Around him, chaos began to bloom. A human aide beside him dropped her tablet and clutched her head. "What? I can't." Her voice cracked, louder than usual, unsteady. Another delegate, Ambassador Rhine, stood abruptly. "Don't touch me," he shouted at a Varn interpreter, who had merely reached to return his stylus. The Andronax, quick to notice, leaned forward with keen interest. Varkan grinned. "There it is," he said, the true face beneath the mask. Jack struggled to respond. His mind raced, full of thoughts he had never had to manage unaided. Fear, embarrassment, a strange kind of shame. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped when he heard something he had never heard in the council hall before. Someone crying. A young envoy, barely 25, had sunk to the floor, sobbing quietly, shaking under the weight of feelings she'd never known how to process. Others were pacing, some speaking too loudly, others saying nothing at all. No one knew what to do, and then the whisper spread across the room. "The implants, they're offline." Panic followed. The humans were unraveling. The carefully constructed facade of reason and diplomacy melted into raw confusion. Some clutched their heads, some shouted, some just sat in silence, overwhelmed. Without the implants, they were normal, vulnerable. Jack stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "We must remain calm," he said, but the words lacked the usual rhythm. His voice was too firm, too loud, too human. Varkan rose as well, spreading his arms in mock welcome. "At last," he declared, "the council meets the real Earth." Several alien delegates watched with concern. The Kratari, normally supportive of Earth, leaned toward the exit. The Varn scribes backed away from the table. Jack raised a hand, though it trembled. "This is temporary, likely a solar flare disrupting local fields. You are losing control, Voss," Varkan said coldly. "Your people are breaking apart without their machine. What does that say about you?" Jack looked around. He saw panic, he saw fear, he saw truth. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the panic, something else stirred, a question he had never asked. Have we truly mastered peace, or just hidden from ourselves? The lights flickered again. The station buzzed louder. A voice crackled over the comms. "Attention. Emergency systems active. Solar interference at critical threshold. Neural tech offline. Stand by for updates." And then silence again. But this time it wasn't peaceful. It was tense, wild, real. Jack Voss closed his eyes for a second, breathed, felt. The council hall no longer felt like the calm, polished center of diplomacy. It now echoed with voices. Sharp, raised, trembling. For the first time in centuries, the human delegation was not controlled by implants or algorithms. Their raw emotions filled the air like static. Commander Jack Voss stood in the center of it all, heart pounding. Without the Courteous mode implant, he felt everything, the stress tightening his jaw, the confusion spinning in his chest, the pressure behind his eyes. Every breath felt heavier, every sound louder. He turned toward his aide, Mira, who usually spoke with perfect poise. Now she was pacing in tight circles, muttering, "I can't think clearly. This is wrong. It's too much. Everything's too loud." Ambassador Ryan, the older delegate seated across the table, had gone red in the face. "We were exposed. This is sabotage. Someone did this on purpose," he snapped, slamming his palm against the table, causing his datapad to clatter. "No one did anything," shouted another voice, young, angry. "We've relied on this tech for too long. We're soft. Look at us." Jack stepped forward, trying to steady his voice. "Everyone, please. We need to focus. This is temporary. We must stay together, and stay together." Ryan interrupted, his voice breaking with a laugh. "I haven't had a full emotional reaction in 30 years, Jack. And right now, I want to throw this entire table into space." The council members from other worlds looked on, stunned. Most had never seen human emotion displayed so openly, or so violently. Varkan Sith watched with clear satisfaction. The Andronax representative leaned forward, clasping his gloved hands. "So this is the noble race of peace," he said softly, as if speaking to no one. "Stripped of its leash, it howls." "Enough," Jack said sharply. The word rang out louder than he intended. A few heads turned. Mira stopped pacing. Ryan's hand froze mid-gesture. Jack closed his eyes, drew in a long breath, and tried again. "We are experiencing a rare situation. The solar flare disabled the implants. This isn't our fault," he said. "But it is," whispered Mira, her voice shaky. "We built our identity on artificial calm. We never learned how to handle real feeling." Her words hung in the air. Silence returned for a moment, but this time it wasn't composed. It was heavy, full of tension. A young delegate suddenly stepped forward, a quiet man from Earth's North Pacific district. "When I was 9, he said, "my mother died in front of me. I didn't cry. The implant wouldn't let me. I remember feeling cold, like I was broken." No one interrupted. Now he continued, voice trembling. "I feel it, like it just happened. Like I've been holding it in for years, and I don't know how to stop it." His face crumpled, and tears spilled down his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them. Across the table, a Kratari diplomat tilted her head slightly, observing him with both curiosity and sympathy. The Van scribes whispered among themselves, unsure if what they were witnessing was strength or weakness. Jack stood still, watching. He had never seen a fellow diplomat cry before. The world he knew didn't allow that. In his training, emotion was treated like a virus, something to manage, contain, and neutralize. But now, watching this man speak, break, and still stand, Jack felt something else, respect. He turned back to Varkan. "So," Jack said, "you see us now, the truth beneath the calm. What does it prove?" "That you are unstable," Varkan replied with ease. "That your strength is a performance. Remove the implant and the illusion crumbles." Jack shook his head slowly. "No, what you see is honesty. We've used the implant to maintain peace, yes. But this," he looked around the room, "this isn't failure, it's humanity. Raw, difficult, but real." Varkan narrowed his eyes. "Diplomacy built on emotional chaos will not last." "Then maybe," Jack said, voice firm, "it's time diplomacy made space for emotion." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words for once came without filter, not calculated, not softened, just honest. Behind him, Mira sat down slowly, rubbing her forehead but breathing more evenly. Ryan looked away, ashamed, but quieter now. Other species watched in silence, eyes wide. Jack walked back to his seat, sat down, and folded his hands. "We can weather this," he said. "We will." He wasn't entirely sure, but for the first time he wasn't afraid to admit it. The council hall remained tense. The air was heavy with unsaid words, with emotions too long kept under control, now rising like steam from a cracked pipe. Some delegates had gone quiet, trying to regain focus. Others still trembled with the weight of their own voices, no longer filtered by the courteous mode implant. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was unstable, alive. Commander Jack Voss sat with his fingers pressed lightly against his temple. He was trying to calm his thoughts, to slow his racing heart, but it was like trying to hold water in his hands. Without the implant, emotions didn't wait their turn. They came all at once. Memory, anger, confusion, even grief. He'd spent his whole adult life teaching himself how not to feel in public. Now he was relearning what it meant to simply feel. A light on the table pulsed red. The emergency systems were still active. The neural implants remained offline. Then the voice of Varkan Sith cut through the room like a blade. "I call for a formal motion." Jack looked up. Varkan stood tall, his voice clear and steady, the only one in the chamber untouched by the shutdown. He had always operated without implants. Emotion had never been something he avoided. He wore it like armor. "I motion to suspend Earth's membership from the Galactic Peace Council," Varkan announced, effective immediately. On grounds of compromised diplomatic behavior, technological dependency, and emotional instability. The words echoed. Several alien delegates turned to one another, whispering. The motion was serious. If accepted, Earth would lose its seat, its influence, and its future role in galactic diplomacy. All their work, all their sacrifices, gone. Jack rose slowly from his chair. His body felt heavy, like every step took effort. But his voice, though softer than usual, carried weight. "You call for suspension," he said, meeting Varkan's gaze. "On the first day my people have ever shown their real selves." Varkan didn't flinch. "Exactly." Jack looked across the room, speaking now to everyone. "Yes, we are struggling. Yes, we relied on courteous mode. We believed that peace was best served by order, by emotional control, and for generations it worked. We held back war. We resolved conflicts without blood. But," he paused, "we forgot how to live honestly." He let the words sink in before continuing. "For too long we used the implant like a mask, to hide discomfort, to silence disagreement, to bury pain. Now it's gone. And what you see is not weakness, it's truth." Delegates from the Kretari and the Solari tribes leaned forward, listening closely. "Diplomacy doesn't mean silence," Jack said. "It doesn't mean smiling while feeling hollow inside. Real diplomacy, the kind that survives, must allow room for emotion, for anger, for grief, for the raw parts of who we are. Because peace isn't the absence of emotion, it's the ability to face it, and still choose cooperation." Varkan folded his arms. "And what if your kind turns violent? What if your peace was always fake?" Jack didn't look away. "Then we must learn. We must grow. But you are wrong if you think today shows our failure. It shows our beginning." Around the chamber, reactions varied. Some aliens looked unsure. Others nodded subtly. Jack turned toward the council chair, a tall being of light and stone called Ovalar. "I do not deny our breakdown, but I ask this council, judge us not by our silence but by what we do now that we can truly speak." The hall stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Ovalar's voice rang out. It was calm and steady, echoing softly from the walls. "A vote will be held." The room shifted. Lights on every seat lit up with soft color, red for removal, blue for support, white for abstain. Jack watched in silence as the lights blinked into place. 3 reds, 5 whites, 7 blues. Ovalar nodded. "Motion denied. Earth retains its seat." Jack exhaled slowly. Relief washed through him, not from victory, but from honesty. He had spoken without the implant's filter, without the shield of programmed politeness. And still his words had held weight. Varkan remained silent. He didn't smile, but his eyes showed something different now, not approval, but perhaps acknowledgement. Jack sat back down, his muscles tired, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. Mira, seated beside him, wiped tears from her eyes and gave him a weak, grateful nod. Across the room, conversation slowly restarted. Quieter now, more cautious, more real. The humans were no longer statues of diplomacy. They were something messier, something more human. The tension in the council hall had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. The loud chaos from earlier had faded into a quieter, heavier kind of stillness, like the moment just after a storm, when the damage is done and the world waits to understand what comes next. Commander Jack Voss remained in his seat, trying to steady his thoughts. His hands rested on the table, not clenched, just resting, open. He had spoken from a place he barely knew within himself, and somehow the council had listened. The motion to remove Earth had failed, barely. Now he had to decide what came next. The crisis wasn't over. The Courteous mode implants were still offline, and no one knew for how long. And though Earth had kept its seat, the Council's trust in humanity was shaken. A quiet voice came through the overhead comms. Solar flare levels are dropping. System stabilizing. Partial tech recovery expected within the hour. Jack looked around. His team was emotionally drained. Some sat with heads bowed. Others still looked dazed, like people waking from a long dream they didn't understand. For decades they had spoken carefully, acted politely, and hidden their true feelings behind clean programming. Without it, they had unraveled. But now something strange was happening. In the silence, in the honesty, a small but clear awareness was growing. Jack stood once more, this time slowly. The council turned their eyes to him again. This time no one spoke over him. No one rolled their eyes. No one whispered. "We are grateful to remain part of this council," he began, voice low but strong. "But we cannot ignore what happened here today. Not just the solar flare, not just the panic, the truth underneath it all." He paused. For generations, humanity depended on Courteous mode to hold itself together. We did it to avoid war, to avoid conflict. We believed that if we simply removed the source of aggression, we would achieve peace. But peace without honesty is not peace, it is silence. The Varn scribes nodded slightly, their silver heads shimmering in the light. "We know now," Jack continued, "that we must learn to live with our emotions, not erase them. We can't go back to what we were before, not entirely." He pressed a button on his tablet. A proposal displayed on the shared holographic screen. "This is Earth's commitment," he said. "We will make Courteous mode optional, not mandatory. Every citizen will have the right to remove their implant. In addition, we will begin a global program in emotional literacy, starting with ourselves." Gasps came from the human delegation, not from fear, from surprise. These words hadn't been planned. Jack hadn't asked permission. But they knew, deep down, he was right. "We will remain calm when we can," Jack said, "but not at the cost of hiding who we are. Our diplomacy must now include honesty, vulnerability, and the strength to stand in discomfort." Varkan stood, crossing his arms. "So," he said, "you admit your system failed." Jack nodded. "It wasn't perfect. It gave us a foundation. But now we build something better, something real." Varkan studied him for a long time. Then, with a small grunt, he sat back down. He said nothing more. Chair Ovala, the glowing being of light and stone, rose from their seat. "Earth's proposal is noted," they said, voice echoing gently. "The council will observe your progress." There was no vote this time, no challenge, just a quiet agreement. Slowly, conversation returned to the room. Delegates whispered with their aides. The crisis was not over, but a path forward had been shown. A new path, one that didn't rely on suppression, but on growth. Jack sat down again, exhaling slowly. Mira turned toward him, her voice hoarse but clear. "That wasn't protocol," she said. "No," Jack replied, offering a tired smile. "It was human." Behind him the stars still stretched endlessly across the void. The council hall continued its orbit in silence, but something had changed, not just in systems, not just in politics, something deeper, in the way Earth saw itself. The emergency lights in the council hall had dimmed to a soft, steady glow. The worst of the solar storm had passed. Systems were slowly returning to normal. The hum of life support units grew smoother, the temperature stabilized, screens flickered back to full power, and somewhere in the distance, the soft chime of restored data links echoed faintly. But the Courteous mode implants remained offline, not by failure now, but by choice. Earth's delegation had made a decision, one that would reshape its future, and possibly the Council's as well. Commander Jack Voss stood at the observation deck just outside the Council chamber. The floor beneath him was clear crystal, revealing the curve of the moon far below, grey and still. Beyond that, stars stretched into blackness. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Older than he remembered, more tired than he'd ever allowed himself to feel. But for the first time, he saw something else in his own eyes. Clarity. Behind him, the doors slid open with a soft hiss. "You should be proud," came the familiar, low voice of Varkan Sith. Jack didn't turn around at first. "Pride," he said, "is new to me. Or maybe it's just something I wasn't allowed to feel fully before." Varkan stepped beside him. The Andronax warrior stood tall as always, but his posture was less rigid now. He wasn't here to mock. Not this time. "You surprised many today," Varkan said. Jack gave a small nod. "I surprised myself." They stood together in silence for a few moments, watching the stars. There was no ceremony here, no handshakes, no formal statements, just two leaders facing what came next. "You believe your people will follow this path?" Varkan asked. "Live without the implant. Some won't," Jack answered. "Some will cling to it. It gave us peace. It gave us structure. But more and more, I think many are ready to live with all of who they are, even the parts that aren't easy." Varkan considered this. Emotion is not weakness, but it can become a weapon. "I know," Jack said. "That's why we'll learn to use it with care. Not to hide it, not to fear it, but to understand it, teach it, share it." Varkan looked at him, his gaze steady. "You still sound like a diplomat." Jack smiled, not the perfect practiced smile of a polished representative, but a tired, honest one. "I think I'm finally becoming one." The two men stood quietly for a while longer. Then Varkan gave a short nod and turned to leave. No farewell, no need for one. The conversation had said enough. Jack remained. Later, back in his quarters aboard the Earth delegation's ship, he stood before a small mirror. He removed his jacket, set it aside, and reached behind his ear. His fingers found the small familiar shape of the Courteous mode implant. The skin around it was slightly warm from the earlier surge. He hesitated. Then slowly he disengaged the unit and removed it. There was no pain, just silence. And then, emotion. Not overwhelming this time, not chaotic, just real. He felt the weight of the day, the fear, the courage, the moments of doubt and the quiet victories. He felt it all, and he didn't flinch. This was who he was, not the perfect version shaped by programming, but the man who had stood before the galaxy and told the truth. The world ahead would be harder, messier, but it would be real, and real, he now understood, was the only path forward. He looked out the viewport one last time. The stars, unchanged, burned on in silence, but Earth and its place among them had changed forever.